Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Let me start by giving a counter proposal to you about the jet. I think most of us have taken advantage of the 24 years of flying with Jet Airways. What we need to do is crowdfunding for the maintenance and the ground staff and the crew who are unable to pay their school fees and unable to pay their EMIs, and collect some money on behalf of them. I think that may be a better idea. I have been always flying jet, and I feel sorry for the staff who've been flying us around for the last 24 years. Anyway, let me start by saying that I have always considered myself to be an optimist by nature. Of course, there are many types of optimists in the world. Pie-in-the-sky optimists, daring optimists, grounded optimists, or cautious optimists. Yet I draw my line of being an optimist with pirates, pythons, and piranhas. Incidentally, the topic, as you heard, I have been given to talk is Pirates, Pythons, Piranhas, Will the Faint-Hearted Survive? The truth is that I have absolutely no advice to offer anyone being robbed at sea, strangulated by a poisonous snake, or having their flesh being eaten by a deadly fish. As CEOs, if you do choose to take on pirates, pythons, and piranhas, please ensure you have a darn good succession plan in your organization and have paid all your outstanding debt. That said, the topic today is catchy, and I appreciate the creativity of the topic. With so many CEOs in the room, in the middle of the afternoon, I take that businesses must be doing fairly well. At least there isn't any crisis today. On a lighter note, I hope the CEOs here are not too free too often in the afternoons. Some of you may recall that for 30 years in the United States and North America, between 1950 and 80s, there was a famous rule, 363 rule, in banking, in the financial sector. Borrow at 3, lend at 6, play golf at 3. Life was very comfortable for 30 years till interest rates started moving upwards. That's the time when spreads came down, shrank, riskier lending happened, and eventually thousands of savings and loan associations or housing finance companies went bankrupt, costing taxpayers billions of dollars. That was the end of the CEOs playing truant in the afternoons. I hope time here this afternoon will be well spent. I have seen the galaxy of panelists and speakers. I think you managed to get the who's who, and you have Pawan Goenka, and you have so many excellent speakers, Siddhanshu Watts, Janmajaya Sinha, Kishore Biyani. I saw the list, and I know practically everyone, and they're outstanding in their own spheres. So congratulations for getting all of them together in a room. So initiatives like the CEO Lounge are much needed. It's niche, it's an opportunity to network with like-minded people, and more importantly, it's good to detach from one's work every once in a while. So I fully endorse the philosophy of the CEO Lounge of living a life beyond the boardroom. Given that all of you are experts in your own and leaders in your own field, I cannot offer any advice on how to run your own business. Yet as leaders, irrespective of which sector you represent, there are certain common issues, and this is what I'd like to talk about. As a leader, one needs to constantly scan the environment. You don't need to wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning to be a great CEO. But when you wake up each morning, you need to ask yourselves, what kind of world are we living in? What are the mega trends you see today, and how these changes are going to impact your company? CEOs and CXOs have control over the micro data, but the macro environment perceptions often differ. As far as macro picture is concerned, there's a tendency always to look short term, to look at the short term. As a result, one gets so consumed dealing with the now and the present environment that one has very little time and energy to imagine the future, imagine how to strategize for the long term. In this context, I'd like to share some of my views where India fits in the global picture and highlight some of India's long-term macro trends. As leaders, you have to be optimistic because only then you will be able to motivate your people. Only then you will have a vision to pass on the vision to your management team, and they will have to work to achieve that vision. And yes, if you go only by headlines, it's going to be harder to find that optimism. Globally, we are veering towards a synchronized slowdown across advanced as well as emerging economies. The recovery from global financial crisis, which started in 2008, was very, very slow. And a broad-based recovery was only seen in the calendar year 2017 and the first half of 2018. Since then, global growth has slipped back. IMF is predicting a decline in growth for 70% of the global economies for the year 2019. So 70% of the countries will have a lesser growth in 19 than 18. And the global growth, which peaked in 2017 at 4%, is projected by IMF to be 3.3% this year. The reasons are well known. Despite the tax cuts in the United States and despite low unemployment, growth in US is on a downturn. The inverted yield curve and the pause in interest rate increases by the Federal Reserve for the entire year have increased the possibility of an impending recession in the US. Just as there was hope that the tariff fight between US and China could ease, the US widened its trade hostility stance to the European Union as well. Japan, the third largest economy in the world, has seen prolonged slow growth, and recently its economy has worsened with a string of natural disasters like floods, earthquakes, and typhoons. Germany has slowed down. Italy is in recession, relying on Chinese aid for its infrastructure. United Kingdom is tied up in knots over Brexit. China has been ramping its monetary and fiscal stimulus to counter a slowdown and to deal with impact of tariffs. Much of the global weakness relates to the manufacturing sector, while the service sectors are holding up well. Since 2012, capital expenditure has flatlined. Fewer factories are being built and fewer infrastructure is being built. But leading global companies have announced share buybacks of over $1 trillion during the last year. That means they don't see growth. That's the reason they buy back $1 trillion worth of share buyback. So ironically, as the economic outlook is somber, global stock markets are buoyant. India's growth rate at 7% in the global context stands out. As everyone says, India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. I'm not merely painting a rosy picture, nor am I negating the fact that last quarter's GDP was only 6.6%, which was the slowest in the last 5 quarters. There's no disputing that India's growth rate has slowed currently, but it is important to look at the longer term trend. And the potential that India has to grow faster is definitely there, and we must focus on this potential. I do not worry about the overall India macroeconomic stability, nor am I too concerned about the economic reform agenda. India generally is a gradual, incremental reformer, and will continue to do that. And it will only be over time that tangible benefits of recent reforms like GST and RERA and IBC will show up. There are several problems in the economy, we are all aware of it, and we have to tackle these issues. What really excites me about India today is its scale, the pace of consumption, and the defining structural changes that are happening at the consumer level. That is our greatest strength. India's greatest strength is consumption, domestic consumption. And this is not slowing down. This is not going to go away. This is the space where innovation is happening, where last mile connectivity is taking place, and where lifestyles of people are changing, as well as aspirations of people are improving. In recent period, much focus has been on tight liquidity, asset quality, low investments, tepid growth. By being consumed with these issues, one tends to miss the spots where the sun is shining. I believe private consumption will remain our strongest engine of growth. Now, if I give you some numbers, India has an estimated 235 million credit-eligible customers. Credit-eligible, 235 million. These are people with incomes of over 2.5 lakhs per annum, and customers who are predominantly the age of 20 to 50. Now the question is, are we tapping sufficiently into this credit-eligible population? And the answer is clearly a no. Out of the 235 million credit-eligible customers, just 1/3 currently have a live borrowing from a bank or from an NBFC or from a housing finance company. So only 1/3 of the 235 million have a loan outstanding today. This means that financiers already have an untapped group of 150 million customers who are potential consumers and eligible for loans. If one only addresses this 150 million segment, which is meeting their credit requirements, who have income, annual income, and who have age in their favor, through credit cards, home loans, auto loans, personal, consumer, whatever loan you give them, it will have a huge multiplier effect on the rest of the economy. Although some ticket sizes of some of these borrowers are between 10 to 25,000, but the man on the street today prefers to borrow short-term to get a consumer durable rather than use his own money up front. That is because convenience has set in. The growth in point of sales, the growth in mobiles, low transaction costs, and digital platforms have made consumer credit very, very easy. And to put this in context, in 2008, which is about 10 years ago, 1 million customers were applying for loans each month. 1 million customers across the financial sector. Now, 1 million customers can be acquired in one day if it's a Diwali or a Dhanteras day. This Dhanteras day, the figures of CIBIL shows that we had 1 million customers put all the banks and all the institutions together. Again, the other positive and advantage in India today is household leverage. Household borrowing is still extremely low and low penetration and totally under-penetrated. Take, for instance, India's consumer credit. Consumer credit is always compared as a percentage of GDP. India's consumer credit as a percentage of GDP is 13%. China, it is 40% today. We are 13%. And US, it is 80%. Mortgage to GDP ratio in India is 10%. In China, it is 20%. US, it is 63%. Insurance penetration today, India is 3.7% of GDP. Malaysia, Thailand, China is well above 5%. And mutual fund industry penetration is 12% of GDP. The global average is 62%. The reason I'm giving these numbers is, what does low penetration means? Low penetration of household debt, of household leverage, means that the scope to grow further is enormous, is huge. One just needs to imagine how much power and leverage is available with India's 560 million digital customers. These are the ones who have access to the internet. And this number has more than doubled in 4 years and will increase as years go by. India's digital sector, therefore, is estimated to contribute between $350 to $450 billion by 2025. This is across an array of sectors, be it consumer, education, financial services, agriculture, healthcare, logistics, and retail, particularly retail. So India's growth primarily comes from domestic consumption. And I don't see any reason to be gloomy about our future growth. Short-term issues in the economy will tide over, and these are part and parcel of market cycles. So now let me address the issue of corporate survival for the faint and strong-hearted. When one looks at the broader trends in terms of the largest companies by market cap, it clearly shows that life cycles of companies and their dominance in the world are both getting shorter. Take the top 10 largest market cap in the world in 1980. 6 out of 10 were oil companies globally. 6 out of 10 were oil companies in the 80s. In the 90s, 6 out of 10 were banks, international banks, in 90s. And in 2018, 6 out of 10 companies by market cap are digital stocks. There is only one company which has survived from 1980 till today, and that is Exxon. But that too, Exxon during the last 30 years have acquired companies like Mobil and one other large company. So this poses the big question, how do companies stay relevant for the longer term? It's difficult to answer. Given the lifespan of technology is even shorter, we need to be prepared for further radical change. I have to admit, I don't understand valuations of some of these unicorns. Perhaps I'm too old school, and I cannot digest high valuations of entities with negative earnings. So Uber has a market valuation of $90 to $100 billion, with cumulative losses over the last 5 years of $7 billion. I believe Lyft, again a car hire company in America and North America and Canada, did an IPO at $25 billion with revenues of $2 billion and cash losses of $1 billion. After the IPO, the stock has tanked and it's come down 30–35%. So they say with unicorns, you need a lot of money. You need to lose a lot of money before you start making a lot of money. But how much is the $64 question? How much money you continue losing and putting in? True, everyone is looking for the next Amazon. If you take Amazon's example, more than 20 years since it got listed, Amazon got listed in 1997 to where it is today. That's why Amazon was called the patron saint of losing money. But today its quarterly profits are $1 billion each quarter. So companies like Uber or Lyft are resembling philanthropic organizations. That is one viewpoint, because they extract money from the rich venture capitalists and subsidize urban transportation and for millions of users and create massive amount of employment. So what are these companies doing? They are like philanthropic because they are doing good for the economy. Employment is increasing, urban transport is being improved at a manageable cost, and the large private equities are pouring in money. Either way, as we get more and more online, the logistics sector and everything else revolves around this becoming more promising. Globally, there are growing concerns on the dominance or monopolistic nature of large internet companies. Again, we all know this. Because there are no barriers to access. Countries, including India, are grappling with issues like how to regulate them or even how to tax such companies. Between privacy law, cyber security, misuse of social media, ownership of data, it is difficult to predict what these outcomes would be. You'll get plenty of food of thought from the next 3 panels on AI, change and new work spheres, and all the panelists are top-notch at what they do. I also heard one statement from a very senior American banker recently that in US, 90% of bank robbers have always been caught. 90%. It's the history of US bank robbers. 10% of hackers get caught. only 10. That is the US statistics. So I come to my last point of what makes companies resilient in the new scheme of things. I think a sense of purpose has become central to the narrative for investors. A company's footprint is being mapped closely from an environmental, social, and governance perspective. More than just the inclusive agenda, companies are recognizing that people are wired differently and that diversity brings better decisions on the table. And yet, with all these dynamic changes that are happening, the most important aspect is the culture of an organization. The culture of an organization has to be worked upon every day. Here's a job that cannot be substituted by artificial intelligence. Here's something which robots cannot substitute. I think it's Peter Drucker who said that culture eats strategy at lunch or something like that. A lot of institutions start out with great culture, but leaders believe it's well embedded in the organization. But the reality is that the biggest risk is erosion of culture in an organization. Just like rusting or even hardening your own arteries, it is not always imminently apparent. So it's the same with erosion of culture. It's not apparent. Therefore, one has to keep working on it every day. Values and ethics are always about demonstration at the top in order to ensure that it percolates down to every level in the organization. People will give their all in. People will do anything for you if they're treated well. And if they feel they are in a safe environment, if they feel they are in a transparent environment and a sharing environment. Transparency in workplace gives people the ability to figure out themselves rather than to rely on the grapevine. So the upside is transparency reduces harmful politics and the risk of bad behavior in the office. Remember, bad behavior almost always happens behind closed doors. So hang on to the open door philosophy. So I just want to end, tell you why you should avoid the 3 Ps, pirates, pythons, and piranhas. Pirates are akin to the rogue traders, fraudsters, and the one always trying to game the system. If you want to sleep well at night, the only way is to be unwavering on ethics and values. Always be champions of integrity, transparency, and accountability. These are time-tested values. Now for the pythons, business is filled with snake in the grass type of people. The traitors, the backstabbers, and the double dealers. No matter how enticing the business opportunity is, only deal with like-minded people who share your value systems. Remember, it takes years to build a reputation and minutes to ruin it. And lastly, the piranhas. Hostile takeovers are a reality. We see one happening as we speak. It can happen with financial muscle, and you'll see more hostile takeovers in India. Mergers and acquisitions are inevitable in corporate life, but they need to be, should they be friendly or they could be hostile. In India, we've always seen them friendly, amicable. Very few cases are there where hostile takeovers are happening. But we will change. This is also going to change in India. So build strong relationships. So you always have a white knight to take care of sharks and piranhas. So can the faint-hearted survive? My guess is as good as Darwin's guess, which is it's always about survival of the fittest. On that note, I'll end by saying that work is just one part of life. And as very rightly Deepak Yadav has said, the balance has to be found through family, through laughter, through friends, and pursuing your own interests in life. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Any questions at all? Going once, going twice. Gentleman there has a question. Can we get a microphone to him, please? The table in the center.
Can't see with the light.
And can we put the house lights up, please? May we have the house lights up? Thank you, sir.
On your last statement, sir, so how do you manage your work-life balance? Maybe some tips.
You have to find time for everything. Maybe as you grow older, the sleep becomes less. When you are younger, you sleep more. And you have more hours in the day. You have to manage your time really well. And be quick in meetings. Take quicker decisions, even though you may not get a consensus every time. But as CEOs, we have to move on. Time is important. And you will get a difference of opinion every time you get a group of people who speak up. But as CEO, the buck stops with you, and you have to convince your board, and you have to take the decision and face the consequences. So I think you have to take decisions faster, whatever it is, regarding hiring, firing, merging, whatever it is. I think that is very important, because I think in India we keep on debating, discussing. So I think that is important, how to allocate your time better. Always take breaks, always take holidays. I tell my friend Vikram, he goes, in IDFC, Vikram was working during the day. Here he is working from 9 to 9. He has lunch and dinner in the office. He's running the National Stock Exchange. We keep telling him the exchange will work, but you go home. But he doesn't go home.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Mr. Parekh, thank you very much for the insightful comments. I have a question on the Indian infrastructure sector.
So please keep the microphone close.
Okay, sorry. I have a question on the Indian infrastructure sector. And let me talk about two, telecom and airlines. Even though the penetration levels are still very low, single digit in airlines, and India is the cheapest market for telecom, I think my view is that our innovation is very price-centric versus value-centric. Any views on that?
If you take the telecom sector, you know, the good old days, you couldn't even get a telephone. There was a waiting queue and all that. And the way this has disrupted and changed the market, the tele-density, I remember in 2002 or 2003 was 3% or 4%. Today, the urban tele-density is about 130%, and rural is also about 50–60%. So telecommunication is changing the face of India. Internet, telecommunication, smartphones will really, these are the things that are changing the aspirations of the people. But how did they get to such high tele-density? It's because of affordability, accessibility and affordability. People cannot afford high bills. So you have to give services at a price which the price point has to be such that it fits the pocket of the mass number of people. Otherwise, you'll get an elite few as your customers. So I think despite the telecom industry have seen a shakeout, gradually the rates will go up, but the subscribers will increase and people will be willing to pay slightly higher prices. The telephone bills that you get today are negligible. You know, you are on the phone all the time, and I don't know, the bills I get is 700, 800 rupees a month compared to the earlier days when you had a landline when the bill was coming to massive numbers. So again, as the utilization goes up, as more people, the cost of operating a per unit comes down also. Although telecom companies are not making money, it's a little bit like your internet companies, but over time I'm sure they'll be able to make money. And then they come out with very different and innovative products that will give you a phone, but you have to deposit certain money. And 3 years later, we'll take the phone back and give your money back. Now that is neither your, that money is free money. You don't pay any money on it. It's free money kind of thing. And you know, you have to come out with innovative schemes that Jio is trying to come out with. That, you know, the number of thousands and millions of phones people will get free on a deposit of money which is refundable. But that is not your debt and that is not your capital, but that gives you massive working capital advantage. So you have to be innovative in this, and accessibility and affordability is the key thing. Airline industry, really I would blame the taxation system. The ATF, the airline turbine fuel, is extremely high in India. And over and above that, the states charge a tax. And you know, this is prohibitive. I think we pay more ATF than any other country in the world. And we need better logistics, we need more travel. And, but the states are used to these kind of incomes, massive incomes on airline, on sale of turbine fuel. And so this is what is causing an issue. But you see the crowd at airports with one airline shutting shop. It is impossible to go from anywhere. And the existing airlines have also jacked up their rates. So they're taking advantage. We need some innovation in this. Air India has been subsidized by government for how many years? I used to be on the Air India 20 years ago on the board. It was losing money then, it's losing money now. So it's never made money. And the government keeps subsidizing it year after year because you need mobility, you need transportation. We have to find a workable, viable solution for airline because very few airlines make money. Globally also, if you see, Etihad's history, if you read, they bought Alitalia that went bankrupt. They bought Air Berlin which went under. They bought Air Seychelles which went under. So, you know, their investments globally also, airlines don't have that kind of liquidity. So, no airline is coming forward to acquire jet today.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for an inspirational speech. My specific question is related to the startups. You did mention a case of Amazon. You said 1997 they got listed.
Just speak up a little bit, yeah.
Yes. In 1997, you mentioned that Amazon got listed, and since then, you know, they've been funded by venture capitalists. They lost a lot of money, and obviously they're making profits right now. You mentioned about 2 unicorns. You mentioned about the Uber and one more. And you mentioned that, you know, they're losing a lot of money. So what's your specific advice for the startups who are contributing in the digital space in India? You know, should they be going for the VC route, or they should continue to have an organic kind of a growth and wait for the right time? What's your advice for the startups?
I think if I remember right, India is the 3rd largest startup country in the world after US and Israel, who are, and I think we have to encourage startups. What we lack in India is small private equity funds who are willing to support 5 and 10 crores to these startups. They need small amounts of money. We have the big private equity funds who want to give $100 million or $50 million. I don't know any private equity who is willing to give 2 crores and 5 crores to startup, who are starting small, either in WeWork or in a garage or something. And how do we support startup? And I think some states have taken the initiative of giving free space and incubation centers. Karnataka, I think, is trying to do a lot to encourage startups by giving them free accommodation as incubation till their startup gets some tempo and some. But I think startups need to be encouraged, and we need to do something about them. And I think you should wait. And only thing is, in fintech, there are thousands of startups. Now, if you ask me whether these all will succeed, unlikely all will succeed. Because every day we get a proposal that we have an app which is very right for insurance or asset management. You can't have everything. Each one is trying to get something done. So I think there is a little bit of duplication. But if you have good systems, if you have a good app, and if you get the right audience, but it creates employment. It creates some excitement. The younger generation don't want jobs like we have done jobs all our life. The younger generation wants to work for themselves. They don't need jobs anymore. So they start these startups. But it's tough going for some of them. I know many youngsters who have done 3-4 years of startup and joined a firm afterwards because they ran out of money or they couldn't get money. But as India, I think we need to have a startup fund. And maybe some corporates have to get together, particularly large IT companies whose profits are so huge. Instead of giving 2% to CSR, they can give 1% to startup and have a fund and support some startup. We need something like that to support you guys.
We have time for one last question. Any last questions? The gentleman over there.
Sir, good evening. My name is Manas Datta. You have given a very nice introspection to what India is doing. Economy, our overall field, our span of action and everything. But you have created an extremely nice organization over the last few decades. It's a synonymous to the industry where you are. So only 2 or 3 lines from you that how you create a sustainable and a sustainable business which is respected and trust is created.
Hire the right people and empower them. Leave them alone and let them work. They'll produce results. But you have to hire the right talent. And be open and transparent, as I've always said. You have to have an open organization. And transparency, integrity are the key. You know, all our businesses deal with money. Our raw material is money for everyone. We all aspire, whether it's HDFC Bank wants money, AMC wants money, insurance wants from all of you. And so we compete with each other for different products, for different services. So that is our job, and the fittest survive, or the ones that have the best schemes will survive. And how do you succeed? I think you hire the right people. You need some luck also on your side. Upar wala ki has to see, put a hand on you, otherwise you don't succeed. It's a little bit of luck also. Thank you.